Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Secure Talk. My name is Mark Schreiner, and I'll be your host for this episode of Secure Talk. Today, we're going to be talking to Britton Burton, who is the Senior Director of Product Strategy at CORL Technologies. He's also the host of the CyberPHIx Podcast. And Britton is a cybersecurity and risk management practitioner with over a decade of experience designing and leading security programs and teams in the healthcare setting. We're going to be talking to Britton about some of the upcoming healthcare cybersecurity legislation and some of the latest news in healthcare cybersecurity. But before we do that, let's say hi to Britton. Britton, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Mark. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Hey, my pleasure. Whereabouts are you located?
I live in Nashville, Tennessee. CORL is actually headquartered in Atlanta, so I go down there from time to time, but do most of my work out of Nashville, Tennessee.
Awesome. And how far is Nashville from Atlanta?
It's about a 4-hour drive or 4 hours airport, if you include flight time and security and all that stuff. So one way or the other, it takes about 4 hours to get there.
So do you prefer the drive or the flight?
I have gotten to where I prefer the flight because I can at least kind of be more passively involved in travel. And if you have any listeners that live in this part of the country and ever have to drive through Chattanooga, it is a crapshoot how that's going to go. And so if I can avoid that interchange there in Chattanooga in a car, I'm absolutely going to.
It's funny because I'm in the Seattle area, and I have, 4 or 5 times a year, I have something going on in Portland, Oregon.
Okay.
And it's 179 miles. It's about 2.5 to 3 hours, depending on traffic, getting through a couple different cities. But some people prefer to fly. And for me, like 2.5 to 3 hours, that's kind of a push because when you're going to fly, by the time you get to the airport, you got to get there early, you got to check in. And then when you arrive in Portland, you need to, you have to have some kind of transportation. So I prefer the drive. But I hear you in terms of, when you're driving, you can't be doing other things, and it takes some time and energy. I typically listen to podcasts or audiobook or something. But if it was much longer, I'd be with you. I'd be on the plane.
Yeah. It's also Atlanta traffic is legendarily difficult. So, what should be a 4-hour drive between Chattanooga and Atlanta can become a 6-hour.
Right. What city has good traffic these days?
Yeah, that's true. That's a fair point.
Yeah. Hey, so, it's interesting because we talk to so many different people, so many different areas of cybersecurity, and healthcare is one of those industries where security, data protection are both incredibly important. And I'm curious about any new legislation that you see on the horizon related to cybersecurity in the healthcare industry.
Yeah, I mean that's the loaded topic du jour right now for anyone in healthcare cyber. It feels pretty imminent that something is coming. Obviously the entire cybersecurity industry is in tune with the recent cybersecurity strategy from the Biden administration and all the proclamations within and a lot of talk about harmonizing, rulemaking across all of critical infrastructure. We know it'll be a while until any of that is turned into law, but that was sort of the alert that, hey, some things are coming. But even before that, I talked on my podcast a lot over the past 6 months about it just really feels like if you're reading the tea leaves that something is coming either for healthcare or critical infrastructure as a whole. And so certainly if you've been paying attention to Senator Warner and some of the advances he's wanting to make in terms of cybersecurity rules for healthcare, specifically for healthcare, he definitely has a healthcare bent to what he's doing. He released a white paper in, I want to say it was November now, make it my timing a little cross, but believe it was November, just outlining like basically HIPAA's kind of dated at this point. We need to consider an update. We need to consider continual updates of HIPAA. We need to consider things like incentivizing, health systems towards compliance with whatever updated cybersecurity rule exists, because the voluntary approach, and even in some cases with HIPAA, the mandated approach just isn't working. There can be so many cash-strapped systems that need incentives or need a boost basically to improve their cybersecurity posture. We've got to consider things like that. I talk a lot, I'm sure you've covered it some too, the CISA cyber performance goals. That just feels to me like the beginnings of what will become federally mandated. Again, it may be all critical infrastructure and not just healthcare, but federally mandated as like this is the minimum requirement. This is how you can prove you're at least doing something, where if you do get popped, if you do get breached, that you're not going to be held to the same level of account as if you can't prove you're doing these things. There's another one within healthcare that's called HICP or hiccup, depending on how you pronounce it. It's HICP, and it's kind of a core set of critical controls that just recently was named by Office of Civil Rights as a recognized security practice, meaning if you can prove that you've met these kind of baseline set of controls appropriate to your size of healthcare system, that you will basically be eligible essentially for reduced penalties or even early termination of an audit. And so it's just there's more kind of momentum to like coalescing around standards, I guess, is the way I would describe it, than I have ever seen in my history in healthcare cyber, to where it feels like something is coming. I have listened to some lawyer types who would be better in tune and better positioned to really talk through the lawmaking aspect of it than I, that have said the HIPAA overhaul probably isn't coming this year, but that it's definitely coming. It's just kind of a matter of when. So I don't know, you look through all that and it feels like the HIPAA compliance of the past, 20 years or however long it's now been is probably nearing the end of its runway. And whether it's critical infrastructure as a whole has this new set of rules to abide by, or it is something more tailored to healthcare, like if Senator Warner, for example, keeps pushing and kind of gets out in front of the critical infrastructure stuff coming from the National Cybersecurity Strategy. Something is coming, and it's just a matter of when at this point in my mind.
Well, in the context of healthcare, do you think the focus or the emphasis will be on protecting infrastructure, protecting devices, or is it more on data protection processes and policies, breach notifications, things like that?
Yeah, it's a little bit of all the above. It's interesting, if you look at these CISA CPGs or HICP, I always kind of tie them together. They don't cover the exact same set of controls or of safeguard obligations, but there definitely is some alignment, and they're both very similar in that they try to kind of boil all the complexity of the NIST 853s of the world and all the controls you could do into like what matters the most to defend against the current day active threat landscape. And so if you look at those, they cover a little bit of everything. There's definitely probably more of an emphasis on just the concept of data protection, which that's a loaded term in and of itself. I think a lot of people, any two people you ask would define that differently, right? But there's a lot of emphasis on that kind of domain, I would say. But then there are device level controls, access controls. It's sort of like the starter guide to if you're going to have to start somewhere, if you've never had a security program and you need to start from scratch. If you do these things first, in that first year of a build out, you're going to be really ahead of the curve in terms of the common ways that threats manifest themselves in your environment. And then it's sort of expand and mature to the bigger frameworks that are so hard to consume that you'll choke on them if you don't really have that starting point. So it's a little bit of everything, honestly, but the key is it's a little bit of everything, and I think that's a positive thing.
A lot of times legislation is in reaction to the current event situation. So if we see some kind of threat or some large incident in whatever realm, then our government will react and say, hey, we need to create protections or policies that will, minimize the downside of these events. What are you seeing in terms of the latest news related to issues with healthcare cybersecurity that may impact the kind of the policies that our government is going to develop?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And I totally agree. You typically see um, down the line from when the bad things have happened is when government reacts, right? I think what we're seeing now, specifically in the healthcare industry, this may be true in other industries as well. I'm sure you talk to more cross-industry folks than I do because I'm very specialized within my work itself and also within the podcast that I do within healthcare. Um, but within healthcare, we are definitely seeing a massive trend towards the third-party threat vector. Basically, by that I mean more and more hospital systems, payers, just anyone in the healthcare ecosystem is outsourcing critical business operations to third parties. They're under such cost constraints in healthcare that anything you can do to find more efficient, cheaper ways to get what was typically done in-house to operate a health system, any way you can find to improve that from an efficiency or cost standpoint is very much on the table from your business leaders right now. And so technology is evolving, and the outsourcing and use of technology and data sharing tools and cloud, of course, is just evolving at a rapid pace within healthcare. And healthcare is already pretty immature from a security standpoint compared to a lot of other industries. So when you add the third party component on top of it, attackers are absolutely seeing that, hey, instead of going after hospital system XYZ and trying to compromise, their network or gain access to their EHR or their PACS imaging system, I could much more, maybe I shouldn't say much more easily, I would have much more breadth of coverage in terms of the data I could compromise. If I can go after a vendor who is, hosting the EHR of 50 hospital systems, or who is, cloud hosting the PACS imaging of 50 hospital systems. And so just seeing that more attacks are manifesting from within the third party realm. There was an article towards the end of the past year that I covered on the CyberPHIx that 9 of the top 10 data breaches in 2022, just in terms of volume of records compromised, actually originated in a third party, not by the covered entity. So that is undoubtedly a trend, and there's data to back it up. It's interesting in our world at CORL and at Metatology, our sister company that does a lot of consulting and pen testing and risk assessment work. We kind of see it anecdotally that it feels like the threat vector is switching to the third party more, as opposed to directly coming after, using the third party as an avenue to a covered entity, as opposed to directly coming after the covered entity. But there are tons of articles and data points and, white papers and reports that are backing that up. That I come across frequently. So I don't feel like I'm, crying wolf by saying that. And I think most in healthcare would say they're seeing similar things from their own, their own SOC, their own incident response teams, and so on.
Can you give any specific examples of breaches that have happened through a third-party threat vector?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the biggest one was, it's old now, but it's the one that everyone kind of points to when they go, "Wow, this is a little bit scary." It would be the SolarWinds event. That's obviously 2+ years old at this point, but a third party who had some code base compromise, they weren't aware of it. Obviously, they're in tons of networks, again, not just healthcare, but tons of networks around the country, and was a really scary event that made its way all the way up to Washington, that actually made its way into that cybersecurity strategy, to your point earlier about government tends to react to the thing that has happened a while ago. So that's the biggest example, but there are examples every day that come across my feed that I'm evaluating. Is that something worth keeping an eye on, or talking about, or planning a service or a product around? The biggest ones right now, just kind of broadly speaking, tend to be the billing vendors. A lot of hospitals are outsourcing that rev cycle type operation to third-party providers. It's a complex world. It's much easier to say, you be the expert in that, and we'll pay you. But if you know anything about healthcare operations, I mean, every potential sensitive data point about every patient basically is in that billing information, because it has to be for the coding to work and for the billing to work. And so if attackers can compromise that, it's a treasure trove of healthcare data, PHI, that obviously turns into a HIPAA breach. So those billers, those a lot of legal, like lawyer, external counsel type firms are being compromised. Again, that may not be unique to healthcare, but there are examples of that every week between those two, and then pretty much everything else. But yeah, some specific examples I could definitely name more, but it's basically a few every week of these outsourced third party providers.
Yeah, and I've seen it multiple times that when it comes to the different types of data, the healthcare data, healthcare information is the most valuable and the most costly to when it's released. So it's the most valuable for the hackers, and it's the most costly to those who've lost their data or who their data has been compromised. In terms of attacks, are you just seeing data exfiltration, or are you seeing the malware attacks?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's the little bit of everything again on this one. I think that definitely the main threat that certainly before I switched to being on the vendor side and building products, I was in a large hospital company as a part of the security team. The thing that we were most in tune to, and that when I talk to other pros, they're most in tune to and concerned about, is certainly ransomware, right? And again, that may not be different with a lot of other industries. We see the other kinds of attacks. We see a lot of exfiltration coupled with ransomware. The double extortion kind of attack of, we've ransomwared you and we've also exfiltrated the data. So not only do you have the hook of, you better pay us the ransomware fee, and then you'll get your systems back. But also, if you don't, we still have the data. And even if you think you can, deploy your DR plan and recover, and you're not worried about paying the actual ransom, we still have the data and we'll release it, and you'll have a HIPAA breach on your hands, and all the PR tailwind that comes from that, and so you still have to pay us. That is coming more into vogue, unfortunately. And those attacks are the number one kind of on the radar for healthcare people. The other variants of ransomware, I kind of group them all together. I don't know if you do too, but like wiper attacks and things of that nature that are more just intentionally destructive as opposed to actually trying to gain payment. Anything that basically reduces your operational capacity, healthcare is just highly concerned with and in tune with, because more so than probably any industry, the uptime, the ability to be operational and to not have to go on diversion is just the most important thing to healthcare people. So, definitely other kinds of attacks are manifesting. Business email compromise is a huge one in healthcare, just like in every other industry. It's a difficult one to combat. There can be a lot of money that exchanges hands with it. All of the stuff tends to hit healthcare just like most industries, but the ransomware and kind of operational destructive attacks are the most prominent and also the most concerning to defenders in healthcare, because of that bent towards, we absolutely have to be up 24/7, 365. And if you'll allow me, one thing I want to say there is I always get nervous about healthcare security people who go down the whole human life aspect of operational uptime in healthcare. That is, of course, important. We never want to do anything that would lead to harm of a patient, but I think that can be overused and overblown a little bit. And that's a card you can't play too often, because you'll be kicked out of a lot of rooms if you're talking to surgeons and people who actually deal with human life-saving procedures every single day. So it is an aspect of it, but it's more than just like literal human life. Like, this device might go offline and someone could die from it. It's that they may not make their appointment in time that could prevent a diagnosis that 6 months from now makes them go through extra rounds of chemotherapy. Or, they may not make an appointment that that is really critical for the surgery they're having next week, because they've got to be imaged so that that surgeon can have those images next week. And now that surgery's delayed a few days. Like, that's the more real version of what this looks like, that I think sometimes kind of gets glossed over and sort of like, I don't know, Hollywoodized in terms of the life and death aspect of cybersecurity and healthcare. And so I always try to kind of parse that out for people who maybe aren't in the healthcare space and just hear gloom and doom, life and death, and make sure that, you know, that's communicated a little more clearly. So I appreciate you letting me have that sidebar there. But coming back to your question, ransomware, operational destructive attacks, absolutely the most that we see and the most that we're concerned about.
Okay. And if we, you know, kind of drill down on that third party threat vector, what are some things that companies in the healthcare industry, what can they do to prevent attacks from third parties?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot. It seems like this unsolvable problem, right? Because it's you have such less control over your third parties than you do your own environment by the nature of the arrangement, right? But there are definitely things you can do. I mean, the TPRM, third party risk management, is just it's unequivocal that you have to have a program in place for that now. I think that's probably well enough known that shouldn't be news to anyone, especially, you know, the kinds of listeners you probably have who are cybersecurity pros. I think the difference there, where we sit now as opposed to where we sat 5 years ago, is, you know, 5 years ago it was about how can you assess a vendor before you contract with them, and if you do that, then great job. That's hard enough to do. Even today, that's hard enough to do. But now we're evolving to, you know, the buzz term of continuous monitoring, the ability to scale what you assess across your entire vendor population, and not just that vendor that happens to be coming up for a contract, or, you know, not just that top 5% of your most critical vendors, because you haven't been able to scale your TPRM assessment approach in previous days when you were using spreadsheets and, you know, hundreds and hundreds of control questions that you expect a vendor to answer. So having a mature TPRM approach that allows you to assess your risk posture of your entire vendor population, or at least the entire vendor population that actually has some form of access or data, or even connectivity to your network that you're, you know, that would cause you concern, to do that in near real time, in a continuous state, and not just at the time of contract. I think that's absolutely critical. The other things that I think you've got to be able to do, you know, and that's like a big programmatic approach to solving third-party risk, and is very important. There are some more just kind of like tactical things you can do. Like, are you aware of, you know, do an audit of your B2Bs that you have with people outside of your organization. At a large organization, you'd be surprised at how difficult it is to actually know what B2Bs you have, where they're connecting to, what's on the other end of them, what the rules are on them. Doing things like the mundane things that no one wants to do, of what third parties have access, or how are you credentialing them? How are you giving them usernames and passwords? You know, do you force them into some sort of mandated remote access tool that you can monitor? There are several vendors that really offer really cool products in that space now, versus, you know, opening up ports to the internet and things of that nature. Like, just getting your arms around some of that basic blocking and tackling is really, really important. And then coupling that with a TPRM strategy, a partner, a tool suite that allows you to really do TPRM holistically and not just at time of contract, I think are kind of what I would focus on.
So if we talk about CORL Technologies and your solution, is this basically you're doing some kind of outward scan and looking at information that's available externally, or are you engaging with the vendors themselves and pulling information, whether that's through a manual questionnaire type process or pulling information through some type of automated process?
Yeah, great question. So we are not doing like active scans. There are plenty of service providers out there that do that kind of thing. We will integrate with those and use those as sort of a data point to our clients within our delivery, but that is not what is core to our delivery. Our main offering that we are shifting to from a decade plus of doing sort of legacy traditional vendor risk assessment, we call it CORL cleared. And it is basically a way for vendors to proactively meet a set of markers that prove that they are a worthy partner to contract with for any client in the healthcare space who would want to do business with them. So there's kind of a couple ways to come at it. It can start with a client of ours wants to do business with a vendor and they say, hey, assess them against the CORL cleared criteria. And CORL cleared is not, it's doing away with 300 control questions that proprietary questionnaires that you subject every vendor to. And it's basically saying, here's a handful of things that are the markers of a good security program. Do you have certification like High Trust or ISO 27001 or whatever? If you have that, that's a really good indicator that you're doing some strong things. And that also provides that depth of due diligence at the control level that we still need, but we shouldn't have to reproduce on our own. Are you doing things like, do you have a dedicated security leader? Do you have an incident response plan that accounts for whatever the customer is actually buying from you? Are you doing regular pen testing and remediation? So it's this set of markers that we would assess a vendor against if we'd never encountered that vendor before, and if the client wanted to assess them against it. And we can much more quickly say, thumbs up, thumbs down, they're meeting these markers. And if they're not, put them on a remediation pathway rather than fall back to meet those markers, rather than fall back to the traditional 300 control questionnaire. The other way we can do it, and really the preferred way, is as vendors see the value in this and see that clients of ours will encounter them and not subject them to the painful questionnaire, is for the vendor to say, I'd like to proactively be CORL cleared. Let me show you that I have all these pieces of evidence. Let CORL's audit team validate that evidence and go, yep, they've got it. Cert looks good. There's not any scary caps in there. Pen test makes sense. They had some findings, but they're remediating them. All of that kind of stuff that our services arm of our technology team does. And basically say, hey, every client who wants to do business with vendor X, they are CORL cleared. So all you have to do is kind of log in, hit the database and go, hey, they're CORL cleared. It's sort of like being TSA pre-check, right? Or clear at the airport. That's the concept behind it. And any of our clients that encounter that vendor that are buying the same scope of products from that vendor that has been cleared, they're basically done with the assessment, the quote unquote assessment, when the client logs into the portal and goes, hey, checking to see, yep, they're cleared. Okay, we're good. That is really where we want to get. And the more vendors that we add into that fold, the more quickly we can skip through the due diligence process, because it's essentially already been done. And then the final piece, we mentioned continuous monitoring. That's another phrase that I think any person you ask would have a slightly different definition of what that means. And I think a lot of the definition of it right now comes from the scorecard type vendors that are doing those scanning tools like you mentioned. Again, there's some validity to those, but there's some problems with them too. So our version of continuous monitoring is, it's obviously that certification that you got that expires at some point and has to be maintained. So are you maintaining that? That pen test that you did 3 months ago, that's great that you did it. We're very glad. That's a piece of evidence that matters, but you have to be continually pen testing. You have to be updating your IR plan on a recurring basis. And so giving not just markers of, can you produce these pieces of evidence, but can you prove that you're continually doing them on different time-bombed basis based on what the piece of evidence is, and continually reporting that into the portal, so that any client that at any point they log in to see if they want to do business with you, because you're CORL cleared, they can see the current status of that. And every touch point we have with a new client who wants to assess a vendor, or every touch point we have with that vendor who wants to do business with a new client, in addition to just, the magic of automation and reach outs for, hey, your sec cert's about to retire, security certification, sorry, that's an internal term. Can you upload your new one? All of that allows that form of continuous monitoring that we're after.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And, I don't think automation is the be all and end all in every scenario. And some things, you can automate, but it's maybe too superficial. Some things do require a manual touch. Um, I'm curious,
Yeah.
when you say somebody is CORL cleared, if my company's CORL cleared, can I use that then for all my other customers so that they can see that I'm CORL cleared? Or because a lot of times this process, this TPRM is initiated by, let's just say, the healthcare provider, the health industry organization, and they will have different vendors selling to them, and they will use a tool or a platform or a process to check to see if their vendors are at or meeting their requirements for security. Okay, but
Hmm.
and then if I clear customer A, but they're working with somebody else, that other organization still needs to kind of see if they're certified or qualified. But if that company is CORL cleared, this is getting really confusing. That can they use that clearance level and to show all of their customers, hey, we've gone through this?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that is absolutely our vision and our intent. Now, there's a market that has to be convinced that the markers that make you CORL cleared are satisfactory, right? So it gets us in an interesting situation. Certainly, with any CORL client, they would be CORL cleared. The vendor can do business. Due diligence is essentially over. Where it gets interesting is obviously they're going to encounter buyers who are not CORL clients. And so our hope is as we partner more with vendors, and that's this is kind of a reshaping of, this is a partnership between vendor, healthcare org, and we're all in this together type of approach. And so it's not just saying healthcare orgs, how do you want to assess vendors? It's saying vendors, we know you hate the TPRM process just as much or more as the healthcare orgs do. And so if you can, take hold of this concept and say, yeah, these markers make sense. We're doing a lot of them anyway. We've thought about being certified, but we're not. We want to do that. Then what we would hope you can do is when you encounter new buyers who are not CORL clients and are going to say, here's our questionnaire, here's our 300 questions, or use this exchange or whatever, that you would say, use that badge of CORL cleared as your, your badge to say, look, I've been cleared. I really believe in this program. Can I explain it to you? Can we tell you why we decided to do this and how other clients of ours are using it to continually monitor us, instead of going through traditional TPRM processes that can take months and months and months? Would you consider accepting this instead? And of course, if you would, feel free to go talk to the folks at CORL to tell you more about it or whatever. Like we believe in sort of the branching market opportunity that provides, because every time we talk to a vendor or a client about this concept, and it's more than just a product, right? There is a technology product to it, but as you mentioned, it's not, automation isn't the end all be all. There's a combination of technology and human services that drive this. And anytime we talk to people about this, they go, that's a really good idea. If you can just get everyone to buy into, those markers are sufficient. And so we kind of want the vendors to almost market on our behalf, and say, look, we did CORL cleared. I think that should be good enough. Now they're going to still, obviously, at the end of the day, the buyers can kind of hold the vendor to whatever standard they want to, unless they're the biggest vendors in the world, they tend to set their own standards. But we definitely think we can start to win people over through not just, our own sales team or whatever, but vendors who have been cleared saying, hey, this kind of makes sense and could really revolutionize you as the healthcare org, your TPRM program. You want to talk about this and see if this will meet your need. But at the end of the day, certainly every healthcare org has to make their own decision.
Sure, sure. And I guess I should have clarified this earlier on. If if I'm using CORL Technologies as a healthcare provider as part of my TPRM, if I say that this vendor is CORL cleared, is that is that my criteria, or is it solely CORL's criteria, or is it a mix?
Yeah, great question. So that's a really important underlying principle to what CORL cleared is. It is not a customizable set of CORL cleared criteria by any customer that signs up with CORL, because the model falls apart if that happens, right? So we certainly take feedback from our customers on here's the requirements. Is anything missing? Are we asking for the right evidence? If something's missing, we absolutely will put it on the roadmap of consideration for, we think we might need to add this. We can't just introduce it like that, because that moves the goalposts on the vendors, and that's not fair. But just like any kind of, framework for security, you've got to have the ability to adapt to the changes in the market and what's going on in terms of threat and framework and control, right? So we will adapt based on our own monitoring of the industry, based on customer feedback. But it's not like customer A can have, these 10 CORL cleared requirements, and customer B can have these 12 CORL cleared requirements, because then the vendor doesn't get the benefit of, I've been CORL cleared, and that means we're good. The one kind of caveat to that would be that there are certainly some scoping details we always collect through, both a combination of asking the vendor and the healthcare organization, what it is that they're buying. And that can alter whether or not something truly is cleared. A classic example, a lot of vendors will sell a SaaS version of their product and an on-prem version of their product, and they may have a high trust cert for their SaaS environment, and they may not have any kind of cert for their on-prem environment. And we have to work through, like, is that acceptable or not? So there are nuances like that we try to account for more in terms of scope, but the scope of what's being purchased. But the actual requirements themselves, they do not shift from customer to customer, because then it doesn't serve the vendor's interests. And this is really about meeting in the middle between all parties and trying to serve both interests, but still have the breadth and depth of security that you need.
Makes a lot of sense. Hey, you're talking about different deployment models for software and applications. What do you do or don't do in relation to looking at SBOMs?
Oh, great question. That is one of our actual requirements. If you're selling, any kind of product that leverages software, we are asking for your SBOM. So, I think I will be transparent. I think the industry is aware that SBOM is a great idea, but it's kind of like, well, what are you going to do with it? And how do you maintain it? And how do you keep it accurate? And so, we don't have the silver bullet solution for that either. We're sort of reacting to the moment of, this is a thing. The federal government has already mandated it for anyone selling to federal government entities. This is another one of those tea leaf things, Mark. You asked about regs that might be coming in the healthcare industry. A lot of times those things leak down from federal requirements. SBOM was all over the cybersecurity strategy. It's all over a lot of CISA documentation. And so we felt like the time is right to at least ask, are you as a vendor capable of producing an SBOM? And all the operational difficulties of how to keep it updated in real time. A lot of people, no one really has answers to that yet. So we're not trying to solve that. But can you produce an SBOM of your current version of the software you're selling? Seems like a reasonable question to ask. And then what we're doing with that on our side is we also have a third-party incident response portal that is kind of an aspect of the CORL cleared technology ecosystem that is basically a way to quickly gather information from key contacts at your third parties. That is kind of a curated service for you, so you don't have to maintain your own Rolodex. And if a large scale security incident happens, like a SolarWinds, or even like a major broad vulnerability that hits the entire security industry, like a Log4j, and you just kind of need to be able to communicate with the right people at your vendor and not just talk to a sales guy. That's kind of the purpose of that TPIR portal. And so by collecting SBOM data, we can, at the very least, surface, data about the types of dependencies you might have in your third-party ecosystem through that SBOM. And again, there are going to be operational and currency issues, right, with SBOM in any use case of it right now. But we think it's important enough to go ahead and ask for it, and for a mature security posture vendor to be able to produce it. And that's a marker of, are they doing the right things? And then as the industry evolves and as SBOM or whatever new version of SBOM comes out that is more sort of operationally real-time viable, we'll be on top of that as the evolved requirement. That's a great example of how our requirements could change over time as we adapt to the industry.
Have you ever gone through an SBOM?
Yes, I have never had to produce one myself. I have read through a few, and yeah, it is. It's not the most fun. It's not what I want to do on a Saturday. I'll put it that way.
No, I was just thinking as you were talking that I don't think I've ever actually gone through one, and I probably should at some point just to see what's there. I'm wondering, what you're looking for, and what are some flags in an SBOM?
Yeah, so honestly, right now, that's kind of what I mean by the immaturity of the industry. We're less looking for flags and more looking for, can you produce it? And then if you can produce it, whenever that next vulnerability comes out, that's in sort of a buried aspect of your software chain, within this compiled product that you built that isn't just all internally coded. We at least have the ability to alert a client to say, hey, there may be something here where vendor XYZ is using this vulnerable product, and it's a major vulnerability that kind of has the whole industry on fire. You should probably communicate with them to validate. They'll be able to tell you for real in real time if it's truly there and if it's vulnerable. But we can at least surface the data point to you so you're aware. So we're looking at it more that, can you produce it, and can we harvest enough data to make it somewhat operationally useful, as opposed to they're not including the right code libraries, or they're using deprecated versions of whatever product. Like, we're not to that level with it yet. Might get there as we evolve, but our use case is much more, if you can show you can produce it, then that's a level of maturity that we're after, and then we can probably do something useful with the data downstream.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, if you were able to catalog, everything in, or all the content in all of your customers' SBOMs, and then kind of at the same time look at any known vulnerabilities or issues that, or zero-day exploits, etc., and then immediately flag any of the SBOMs or the customers that related to, that would be, I think, incredibly valuable.
Yeah, it would be. And what I have learned from people who are better experts in SBOM than I am is that is absolutely a use case, but we may not be there yet, because even if you find a version that you think might be vulnerable of some software package, there are so many nuances to whether or not that's truly is vulnerable that don't necessarily surface in an SBOM, that you've got to be real careful about. Back to your comment about automation, about like automating alerts or reducing a risk rating or whatever for a vendor on something like that. And so it will be interesting to see where that goes. And I also don't want to come off as an SBOM expert. I am not, but that is what I have learned through the process, and very exciting to see where that can go. But not sure, at least we were not confident enough that was the endeavor we wanted to go about as of right now.
Gotcha. Hey, last question. What advice, if you just give one piece of advice for anybody in the healthcare industry in terms of cybersecurity and data protection, or staying compliant with the current regulatory landscape, what is the one thing that they should be looking at?
Now, I think the easiest answer, and I'll probably always get accused of bias on this one, because the bulk of my career in the cybersecurity space has had a undercurrent of risk management, right? But I think being able to efficiently and effectively perform risk analysis and then a risk management process, it sounds like such a cliched and like generic answer, but it is still the number one finding from Office of Civil Rights when they send penalties to a breached or an investigated organization, that they're not performing risk analysis and risk management. And so, number one, that's already a reason to be like, wow, it's HIPAA's been around for 20 some odd years, and we still haven't figured out how to do that. But number two, it is the underlying thing that drives every decision you make about all the cool technologies and bells and whistles and blinky lights that you actually have to invest in to protect your environment. So, that maybe if you just need to get like basic blocking and tackling in place, I would probably do things like vulnerability management and perimeter defense in terms of ports and protocols not being exposed to the internet. Just the stuff that like you're going to get breached tomorrow if you're not doing. But most companies are not in the state of just not having a security program at all. So if you have a security program, you have some basic technologies in place that protect you. I think the most important thing you can do is go out, whether it's you do it on your own or you get someone that helps you, build a risk assessment approach that you can routinely run. You can do it at least once a year, hopefully more than that, right? But even doing it once a year can be really, really hard if you're new to it. And then that you have a risk management framework and governance in place with business leaders actually helping you make decisions about which risks to remediate, because there's going to be cost. There's, it's not just security can solve all the world's problems. That would really be the thing that I point to.
Awesome. Hey, Britton, I said that was the last question. I actually have one more question, because you've mentioned a couple times that the Office of Civil Rights, is involved in these discussions related to cybersecurity, especially in the healthcare space. And I got to say that was a blind spot for me. I didn't understand why the Office of Civil Rights or how they became active in this space. Can you explain a little bit about the background there?
Sure. In terms of how they became the sort of the primary boogeyman for in terms of compliance for healthcare security people, I don't actually know the complete background there, but essentially HHS Health and Human Services charged Office of Civil Rights to be the oversight for HIPAA and high tech when those acts came out. So whereas in other industries you may be used to, the SEC or some other governing body, the Office of Civil Rights, if you're a healthcare security person, the Office of Civil Rights is who you pay attention to in terms of rule setting. So they own investigation and enforcement of HIPAA and high tech, and particularly our privacy brethren in the healthcare world who are responsible for complying with the HIPAA privacy rule. All kinds of inquiries and investigations from Office of Civil Rights come their way. But yeah, that they were named as responsible. I don't know the entire background of why them versus someone else. But that's the primary entity in healthcare, again, at the behest of HHS that does compliance, investigation, and requirements for healthcare.
Thank you for that. And it's very interesting. Actually, as you were talking, I'm on their website, and there is a ton of information here about cybersecurity in the context of healthcare providers, et cetera. So, and so some of those questions are that I asked early on related to, upcoming legislation and which way the winds are blowing, and I'm looking at, there's several articles here right now. There's some podcasts. So, hey, I just learned something new. So thank you for that. Hey, Britton, really enjoyed this conversation. If people wanted to learn more about CORL Technologies or your CyberPHIx podcast, what should they do?
Yeah, absolutely. Go to CORLTechnologies.com. That's CORL Technologies.com. And then the CyberPHIx podcast, you can subscribe to us on any of the podcatchers that any of you use. I use iTunes still. I'm old school, I guess. Would love to have you as a listener. I do about one or two a month specifically on healthcare security topics, and would love to hear from you. And on the CORL side, if CORL Cleared was of interest to you, CORLTechnologies.com, or if you want the personal touch, please don't hesitate on LinkedIn. I'm on there, Britton Burton. Please don't hesitate to message me. I will talk to you personally, or get you in touch with someone who can meet your needs. And appreciate the plug there.
Hey, Britton, it was great having you on Secure Talk, and I'd like to wish you and the rest of your team a great remainder of 2023.
Thanks, Mark. Have a great one.
Hello, welcome to Secure Talk, your trusted source of information on the latest threats, trends, tools, and technology related to cybersecurity and compliance.